had planned the hike a few weeks earlier. I'd been meaning to get away from the city for a while, and I found this remote trail online that didn't show up on most of the big hiking apps. A guy in a forum I trusted had mentioned it, said it was quiet, underused, and perfect if you wanted to get some real solitude. He had included rough GPS coordinates and said it looped around an old fire lookout that had long been decommissioned. I didn't think much of it. I've done solo hikes before, and I'm pretty good at handling myself in the woods. I parked at the edge of a Forest Service road just after sunrise. The air was cold even for early fall, and the clouds looked like they might settle into something thicker by mid-afternoon. I had my pack loaded up with 2 days of food, my water filter, a basic tent setup, and an emergency GPS beacon. My phone barely had a signal, but I had a topographic map printed and laminated. I also carried a knife, bear spray, and a headlamp with spare batteries. I don't take chances when I'm out alone. The first couple of miles were on a real trail, but after a while I had to rely on the GPS coordinates and the map. The path the forum guy talked about wasn't marked officially, but it was clear enough once you were looking for it. Old footprints, faint impressions of boots, and sections where the brush was just slightly parted. It was narrow, uneven, and had clearly not been maintained in years, but it was there. I followed it steadily, moving uphill along a winding ridge. The silence was perfect, just the sounds of birds, the rustling of squirrels or chipmunks, and the occasional gusts of wind shaking pine needles loose. I moved slowly, taking in everything around me. I passed through dense clusters of trees where it got almost too dark for comfort, then emerged into open stretches of rock and dry grass. I saw a deer in the distance, then later, a fox. For the first half of the day, I felt exactly what I had come for, disconnected and alive. Around noon, the trail began to climb more steeply. It curled up the side of a thickly wooded hill. I stopped once to eat some jerky and a protein bar, then pushed forward. My plan was to make it near the fire lookout ruins by late afternoon, set up camp nearby, and return by the same route the next day. But something changed after about 5 hours of hiking. I was moving through a high section of the ridge when the trail began to look off. The dirt path that had been relatively easy to follow started to break up into smaller deer tracks and patches of loose stone. I double-checked my GPS. I was still within the route I had marked, but I started noticing something strange. The trail seemed to veer west when the route I had planned continued north. I thought maybe I had taken a wrong turn at some point, or that the trail was just poorly marked. I decided to follow it a bit further to see if it reconnected. But the more I followed it, the less it looked like a trail. The trees were denser. The undergrowth was thicker. Some parts were so choked with brush that I had to crouch down or push my way through with both arms. The ground sloped unevenly, and the light filtering through the canopy was dim. It started to get harder to tell how much time had passed. I checked my watch and realized it was already past 3. That's when I stopped. I pulled out the GPS, checked my coordinates again, and zoomed in on the map. I was off by nearly half a mile from where I had planned to be. I turned around to head back the way I came, but now everything looked different. I moved uphill, thinking I'd find a landmark or something familiar, but the woods swallowed every path I tried. No matter how far I walked, the trail I thought I had followed was gone. I wasn't panicking yet, but I knew I had made a mistake. I was still okay. I had supplies. I had the emergency beacon if I really needed it, but I didn't want to use it unless things got serious. I gave myself another hour to try and find the trail. I moved methodically in circles, checking my GPS every few minutes, scanning the ground, and trying to find my original path. But nothing was familiar, and the more I moved, the more the woods seemed to close in. The sun was low by then. I found a small flat area near a tree where I could pitch my tent. I cleared the ground, set up camp, and got a small fire going using a fire ring someone had clearly made years ago. Just a few stones in a circle and some old, charred wood. That comforted me a bit. Someone else had been here before at least once. I ate a cold dinner and sat near the fire until the darkness made it impossible to see past the first row of trees. The woods were loud, louder than earlier. I heard more branches snapping than I was comfortable with. I couldn't see anything, but it sounded like something was moving in the brush. Maybe more than one thing. Could have been deer, maybe elk, maybe raccoons. But the noises didn't stop. They came in short bursts, like something walking, then stopping, then walking again, over and over. I didn't sleep much. Every time I started to drift off, a noise would snap me awake again. Around midnight, I thought I heard breathing. Close, not from me. Heavy, just outside the tent. I froze and didn't move for what felt like hours. I had the bear spray in my hand, ready to use, but nothing touched the tent. No sounds after that. Just silence so deep it hurt my ears. By the time the first light came, I was already packing. I wanted to get out as fast as possible, but I had no idea which direction to go. My GPS was still working, and I tried to backtrack again using it. I headed south, thinking I could intersect the original trail or at least hit the service road from a different angle. I hiked for almost 3 hours, but nothing looked right. I crossed a stream that shouldn't have been there. Then I found an old tree stump I was sure I had passed the day before, but from the opposite direction. I was walking in circles. That much was clear. I stopped to rest and drank from my water bottle. I still had enough water and I could refill it from streams if I had to, but I was wasting time and energy. I knew the weather would shift soon. The clouds were low and the temperature had dropped. Around noon, I heard a sound I hadn't heard before. Metal. I followed it slowly, stepping over fallen trees and climbing through brush until I found a clearing. In the middle of it stood a rusted trailer. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. The tires were flat, the windows smashed, and the door half hanging off its hinges. Graffiti covered most of the exterior, but it was faded and hard to read. There were signs that people had used it, maybe as shelter: burned wood in a ring, some can scattered around, and a melted blue tarp. I didn't want to stay near it, but I figured maybe someone had come through this area before. I took a few photos of it on my phone, marked the coordinates, and kept moving. But after another hour, I came back to the same trailer. I didn't even realize it until I saw the same pile of broken glass and the same rusted axe handle sticking out from under the leaves. I must have looped back again. That's when the panic started to creep in. I forced myself to stay calm, but my legs were getting tired, and my breathing had picked up. I tried to stay positive, tried to remind myself I had food, water, gear, and the emergency beacon. But that trailer, it wasn't on the map. It wasn't mentioned in the forum post. It shouldn't have been there. I moved further south again, following the terrain downhill. I figured sooner or later I'd hit a road or another trail, something that could connect me back to civilization. But by mid-afternoon, I saw something that stopped me cold. Another tent, old, torn, ripped apart down the middle like someone had slashed it. Pieces of it were hanging from tree branches. I approached it slowly. There was no one inside, but the fire ring nearby was black with old ash, and there were torn food wrappers scattered around. A moldy sleeping bag was half buried under leaves. I couldn't tell how long it had been there, but it wasn't recent. Years, maybe. There was a backpack leaning against a tree. I opened it. Inside were crushed cans, a flashlight with corroded batteries, and a wallet. No cash inside, just a faded ID card. I don't remember the name, but the photo showed a guy maybe in his late 20s. I didn't touch anything else. I backed away slowly. That's when I activated the emergency beacon. It would take time, maybe hours, maybe a day, but someone would get the signal. I stayed near the torn tent until nightfall, too shaken to move further. I set up my own tent nearby, started a fire, and tried to stay awake all night. I kept hearing things again. This time it was different. Not footsteps, chopping sounds. Not fast, just occasional, sharp, like wood being hit with a blunt axe. But I never saw anyone. In the morning, the fire had gone out completely. I checked the beacon, still transmitting. At around noon, I heard it, a helicopter. I ran out into the open as far as I could, waving my arms, using my headlamp to flash light, even though it was day. The helicopter circled once, then again, then dropped a marker. A voice crackled on a loudspeaker telling me to stay in place. It took them almost 3 more hours to reach me on foot. Forest rangers, 2 of them. They looked surprised I was even here. They said this area wasn't supposed to be accessible. I had been planning the trip for over a month. Not because I was some expert hiker or anything like that, but because I needed a break from everything. Work had been eating away at me. The city noise was getting under my skin, and even simple things like grocery shopping or scrolling through my phone started to feel pointless. I wanted to go where I couldn't hear car horns, where I didn't have to deal with notifications, and where I could just walk and be alone for a while. That's all I really wanted, some peace. I picked a trail I'd read about in some old online forums. It wasn't the most well-known, but it wasn't completely abandoned either. It was in a national forest about a 5-hour drive from where I lived. The trail looped through a remote part of the park and took about 3 to 4 days to finish if you were going at a steady pace. People who had done it said it was quiet, sometimes overgrown, but beautiful. That sounded perfect to me. I packed up everything I thought I'd need: tent, sleeping bag, food for 5 days, a little extra just in case, water purification tablets, my first aid kit, a flashlight, spare batteries, a map I printed out with highlighted trail markers, and my GPS. I brought my phone but expected it to lose service within an hour of starting the hike. I was ready for that. I wasn't worried. I parked at the trailhead early in the morning on a Wednesday. It was cloudy, but the forecast didn't call for rain. The trailhead was empty, and there were no other cars around. That was a little surprising, but not totally unexpected since it wasn't a popular trail and it was midweek. I signed the logbook at the start, noting my name, date, and expected return in 4 days. That was the last time anyone knew where I was. The first day of the hike was calm. There was a light wind blowing through the trees, and I could hear it rustling the leaves above me. The trail was narrow but clear enough to follow. It twisted through patches of pine and spruce, and the ground was soft with old needles. The forest felt still and heavy, but not in a bad way. It was quiet. That was what I came for. I kept walking at a slow pace, stopping every hour to drink water or snack. I had marked where I wanted to camp that night, a small clearing near a stream that I had read about online. I reached it by early evening and set up my tent. The stream was just as I expected. Narrow, shallow, but enough to filter water from. I refilled my bottle, made some instant noodles with my camp stove, and ate while sitting on a log. When the sun started to go down, I crawled into my sleeping bag and lay still, listening to the wind. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking up once in the middle of the night to some animal noises far off in the trees. Probably a fox or something. I didn't get out. I turned over and slept again. The second day started out normal. I packed up and moved deeper into the trail, passing through thicker brush and steeper sections. The higher I got, the fewer signs I saw of other people. The trail started to look rougher. Roots across the path, overgrown parts one had to push through, fewer trail markers nailed to the trees. I still had my printed map and the trail was still there, but it was clear not many people had come through lately. By mid-afternoon, I realized I was walking slower than I should have. The elevation gain was more than I had planned for, and I kept stopping to check the map. I didn't feel lost, just behind. I found a flat spot under some pine trees and decided to set up early. I had enough food, and I figured I could make up the distance the next day. That night, I heard something close to my tent. At first, I thought it was just wind again, but this time I felt something strange. It was the kind of silence that felt too silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. And then I heard the snapping of twigs. It wasn't right next to me, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, but it was steady. Something was walking, slow, crunching leaves, breaking small branches, then stopping, then starting again. I stayed still in my sleeping bag, holding my breath. I didn't move. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't even reach for the flashlight. I just listened. Eventually, the sounds faded away. I told myself it was a deer, maybe an elk. But deep down, I knew that wasn't what it sounded like. I'd heard animals in the woods before. They don't move that way. Not with those heavy steps. Not with that kind of slowness, stopping every few seconds like they're listening. I barely slept. The next morning, I woke up feeling sore and cold. My sleeping bag was damp, and the sky was darker than it should have been. Thick clouds had moved in overnight, and I could smell rain coming. I ate quickly, packed up, and started moving. I wanted to make up the distance and get through the toughest section of the trail before it rained. I didn't want to spend another night out here if I didn't have to. As I climbed higher, the trail started to disappear in sections. It was still there, but only barely. Some trees had fallen across it. In some places, the brush had grown over so much I had to guess where to walk. I checked the map over and over. I used the GPS just to be safe, but the signal was weak, and the battery had already dropped below half. It started raining in the early afternoon. First it was a drizzle, then it turned steady. The wind picked up too. I put on my rain jacket and kept going. Mud started forming on the trail, and I had to be careful not to slip. My boots were soaked through within an hour. That was when I started hearing the steps again. First, I thought it was an echo, my own footsteps on the wet ground. But then I stopped, and I still heard them. Behind me, they were slower than mine, heavier, not constant like someone walking at a normal pace. Just now and then, a step, then silence, then another step, like whoever it was didn't want to be noticed. But I noticed. I didn't look back right away. I didn't want to. I just kept walking. My heart was thudding in my ears, and my breathing started getting harder. I stopped again. The steps stopped too. I finally turned around. No one was there. I scanned the trees. Nothing. No movement, no shapes, no colors that didn't belong. But the feeling stayed in my stomach like a stone. I kept moving faster after that. I started slipping more often, cutting through branches, rushing over wet ground. I checked the GPS again, and the signal was gone. The rain was falling harder now. I had no choice but to keep moving forward. I still had a long way to go before the next flat spot marked on the map. It took me hours to reach it. By the time I got there, it was getting dark. I was soaked, exhausted, and my knees were shaking. I set up my tent in the rain, barely able to see straight. My fingers were numb, and I dropped my flashlight twice. Everything inside the tent was damp. I changed into dry clothes and crawled into my bag, shivering. I didn't eat dinner. I didn't even take off my boots. That night, I didn't sleep. I heard the steps again, closer this time. I laid there, stiff, holding the knife from my pack in one hand under the sleeping bag. I couldn't hear the rain anymore. All I could hear was the soft sound of something moving outside my tent. Not fast, slow, steady. Crunch, pause, crunch. Then silence. It circled once, then again. Then it stopped, right outside. I didn't breathe. My hand was cramped from gripping the knife. My teeth were clenched so tight my jaw hurt. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It felt like hours. But eventually the sound moved away, and I still didn't move. I just laid there. I think I passed out from exhaustion at some point. When morning came, everything was still. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. I stepped outside, scanning the trees. Nothing. But on the ground about 20 feet from my tent were footprints. Not boots. Bare feet. Big ones. Wide. Deep in the mud. Too big to be mine, and definitely not from an animal. Just two of them. Then they disappeared back into the forest. I felt sick. I didn't bother eating. I packed everything up as fast as I could, skipping steps. I shoved the tent in the pack still damp. I didn't even check the GPS. I just followed the map, trying to find the rest of the trail. I walked fast. Sometimes I jogged. My legs were sore, my ankles ached, but I kept going. I didn't stop to rest, I didn't stop to drink. I didn't care. I just wanted out. By late afternoon, I found a part of the trail that looked more traveled, less overgrown. My map showed I was nearing the last stretch. If I pushed hard, I could make it out by nightfall. And then I heard it, the steps, behind me, closer than before. I didn't stop this time. I started running, pack bouncing, boots slipping, lungs burning. I didn't care. I just ran. The trail was blurring past me, trees becoming a green tunnel. I tripped once and hit my knee hard, but I got back up. I kept running. I never looked back. I just kept moving until I saw the edge of the parking area through the trees. I burst out of the forest soaked, bleeding from my knee, shaking, and out of breath. My car was still there. No other cars. I yanked. The idea started sometime in early spring when I was going through a rough stretch mentally. Everything in life had become loud and fast, and I just wanted silence. I started searching online for long-distance hiking trails where I wouldn't see a lot of people, places where I could just walk, think, and stay alone for a while. That's how I came across this backcountry trail up in the Bitterroot Mountains in Idaho. It was called the High Ridge Loop. Not many people talked about it, which made me want it even more. From the satellite images and trip reports I could find, the trail ran in a huge circle through a mix of pine forest, alpine meadows, some steep ridge lines, and a few old logging roads. It was about 34 miles long. Most hikers did it in 3 or 4 days. I gave myself 6. I wanted to move slowly, take it all in, camp where I felt like it, and not rush for once. By the time August came around, I had already bought everything I needed. New boots, a solid backpack, bear spray, a light tent, extra socks, food for a week, water filters, maps printed out and laminated, and a solar charger for my phone even though I expected to lose signal an hour in. I even bought a GPS beacon just in case. I planned it down to every detail. The drive from my place to the trailhead took almost 6 hours. I started it early in the morning and got there just before noon. It was remote as hell. The last 20 miles were dirt roads with no signs, just directions I had written down from online posts. At the trailhead, there were only 2 other cars. Both were dusty and looked like they had been parked for a while. I figured maybe some other hikers were already deep into the loop. That didn't bother me. I wanted space. I remember standing at the wooden sign where the trail started and just taking a deep breath. The kind of breath you only get when there's no traffic, no people yelling, no emails, no ringing phones. Just wind in the trees. I took that first step and started walking north into the woods. The first day was almost relaxing. The trail was well marked, the sky was clear, and I passed through these tall pine groves where the sun came down in streaks through the branches. Everything smelled like warm bark and dry needles. I saw a deer just before dusk and a few squirrels. I made camp near a small creek around 6 p.m. and filtered water while I boiled rice and lentils on my little stove. No one else came by. No sounds but nature. That night I slept light. I usually do on the first night out in the woods. Every sound feels like it's just outside the tent. I kept thinking I heard footsteps, but it was probably just branches falling or a raccoon messing around. The second day, I hiked uphill most of the morning, then crossed into a wide open meadow filled with dead tree trunks. It was weird how quiet it was out there, like no birds, just wind and the crunch of dry grass under my boots. That afternoon, I reached the high ridge the trail was named after. The view was stunning. Jagged hills rolling for miles in every direction, all green and gold. I sat up there for over an hour just looking. Then I noticed something strange. Far below in one of the valleys, I thought I saw a flicker of movement. Not an animal, not a car, not smoke. Just something, a shape walking through the trees. Way too far to make out clearly. But it was walking. At least it looked like that. My eyes kept going back to it. But I kept telling myself it was probably a bear or maybe even another hiker bushwhacking through the valley. No big deal. I moved on and didn't think much about it the rest of the day. That night, I camped near a small tarn, one of those little mountain ponds surrounded by boulders and reeds. It was colder than the night before, and I built a small fire just to feel a little more human. I ate some jerky and trail mix, cleaned up, and crawled into my sleeping bag. Around 2 a.m., I woke up sweating. Not because it was hot, but because I had a feeling. That kind of feeling where your brain is trying to wake you before you even know why. I lay still, listening hard. First, nothing. Just wind again. Then, I thought I heard something soft. A crunch. Then another. Maybe 50 or 60 feet away. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. I reached slowly for the bear spray and unzipped the mesh on my tent to peek out. Pitch dark. My eyes adjusted a little. I could see the outline of the trees and the moonlight bouncing off the water of the tarn. Then I saw movement again. A shape, definitely a person. Not a bear, not a deer. Too tall. They were just standing there, off to the side of the pond, facing the water, not moving. I stayed frozen. I didn't call out or shine a light. I just watched. After maybe 30 seconds, they turned slowly and walked into the trees. Not toward me, just away. No flashlight, no gear that I could see. Just walking in the dark like they knew the land. Eventually, I laid back down, but I didn't sleep much. I kept the spray in my hand until the sun came up. The next morning, I packed up fast. I didn't feel good anymore. That peaceful, alone feeling had turned into something else. Something heavy, like I wasn't as alone as I thought. But I didn't want to panic or turn back yet. I convinced myself it was probably just another hiker who couldn't sleep. Maybe someone on a different loop. But then came the next weird thing. About 3 hours into the day's hike, I started seeing boot prints. Not mine. These were deeper, wider. Someone with bigger feet. Looked like maybe size 12 or 13. I wear size 10. The trail was dusty in spots, and the prints were fresh, like within the last day. That's fine, I thought. Probably another hiker ahead of me. But then I noticed something else. The prints didn't follow the trail the whole time. Sometimes they veered off for no reason. Sometimes they circled back around trees. One time I saw them loop off trail, then come back on 20 yards later like someone was deliberately moving off track. Almost like they didn't want to be followed, or didn't want to leave a clear line. It didn't feel right. That afternoon, I stopped to refill water at a stream and found something lying on a rock. A torn piece of tan fabric, like part of a shirt. Looked like it had been snagged on a branch. No blood, no bones, just cloth. I left it there and kept walking. By the time I made camp that night, I was jumpy. Every crack in the woods made my head snap around. I camped farther from the trail than usual and kept the tent behind some thick brush. I didn't even cook dinner, just ate dry food and climbed in early. My nerves were fraying. That night I heard breathing. I swear I did. Slow, steady, human breathing. Not mine. Came from just outside the tent, from the left side. I froze. Every hair on my arms stood up. I didn't look. I didn't move. The breathing stayed for maybe 10 seconds, then faded. I waited another hour before I even sat up. I stayed up until dawn, then packed up as fast as I ever have. I was supposed to have 2 days left in the loop, but I changed my route to cut it short and head straight toward the access road that looped along the east side of the trail. About halfway through that day, I saw something I'll never forget. It was around 3 p.m. in a hollow between two ridges. I came around a bend and looked down toward a grove of pines. There, nailed to one of the trees, was a pair of boots. Not hanging, nailed. The laces had been tied together, and thick rusty nails had been driven through the tongues and into the bark. They looked old, dirty, worn through at the soles. Below them, on the ground, was a pile of ash, like a campfire had burned there. But there was no fire ring, no rocks, just ash and some bits of scorched metal. I didn't stop. I didn't take a photo. I just walked faster. That evening, I found a flat spot beside a dried-up riverbed and set up my tent with one ear listening the entire time. I placed a few pans and metal cups outside around the area so I could hear if anything stepped too close. I know it sounds paranoid, but I didn't care anymore. I just needed to get out of there. At 1:20 a.m., I heard something fall over. One of the pans. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it through the mesh. Nothing. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then I saw a shape again. It was the same one I had seen near the tarn 2 nights before. It was just standing about 30 feet away, just behind a tree, watching. No light, no gear. I sat there shaking, not knowing what to do. I turned on my GPS beacon and sent the ping. It wouldn't bring help fast, but at least someone would know where I was. After 5 minutes, the shape turned and disappeared into the trees. I didn't sleep. At first light, I packed everything and started moving. I didn't eat, didn't rest, didn't even refill water. I had enough to last until I reached the road. I bushwhacked for an hour off the main trail to find it. By noon, I reached the gravel service road, and then I saw a white pickup parked on the shoulder. I didn't go near it. I walked the opposite direction until I got signal, then called for help. I told the ranger station there was a safety concern on the trail. I gave them coordinates and told them I wouldn't feel right until someone checked it out. They said they'd send someone later that day. I made it back to my car around 5 p.m. I didn't stop walking the entire time. When I got back to town, I filed a report. I told them everything. I left early in the morning because I didn't want to deal with the weekend crowd. That was the plan. I packed my bag the night before, went over everything 3 times, and double-checked the weather, which was supposed to be dry for the next 3 days. I was going to hike through a stretch of backcountry trail in the mountains that I'd always wanted to try but had kept putting off. It was about 35 kilometers long, a loop that cut through forest, crossed a few creeks, and climbed to a decent elevation before circling back down to the starting point. The website said it was lightly trafficked, and that was what sold it for me. I wasn't looking for any kind of social experience. I just wanted quiet. I parked my car at the lot near the trailhead around 6:30 a.m. It was chilly out, but not uncomfortable. I zipped up my jacket, adjusted the straps on my pack, and locked the car behind me. There were no other cars there. The sun was just starting to come up, and everything had that early blue-gray color. Birds were chirping, and the air smelled like pine and dry earth. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the trail. The first few hours were peaceful. The trail started flat and wide, winding gently through a patch of tall trees with dense undergrowth on either side. Everything looked healthy and green. I saw a few squirrels, some birds I couldn't name, and one deer far off through the trees. My boots crunched quietly on the gravel and fallen leaves, and I kept a steady pace. I had about 18 kilometers to cover that day before I'd reach the site where I planned to set up camp for the night. I had it all mapped out, 2 nights, 3 days, 1 long loop. I didn't see another person the entire first day. That didn't bother me. I liked the solitude. It was kind of the whole point. I stopped around noon and ate a sandwich by a small stream, sitting on a fallen log and resting my legs. The only sounds were the trickle of water and the occasional rustle of the wind. Everything felt right. But somewhere around mid-afternoon, I started getting this strange feeling. Nothing specific had happened. The trail was still well-marked, the weather was still good, and I wasn't lost. But it was this subtle sense that something was off. Not in a big, obvious way. Just this pressure in the back of my mind, like I had forgotten something important or like I was being watched. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just the result of being alone in the woods with my thoughts, something my brain wasn't used to. I passed through a patch of forest that felt different than the rest. The trees were thinner, and there was less underbrush. Everything felt more open, but somehow more claustrophobic at the same time, like the light didn't come through as strong. I checked my map twice just to be sure I hadn't gone off the main trail, but I was exactly where I was supposed to be. There were no signs of anyone else, no footprints, no trash, nothing. I reached my planned campsite around 5 p.m. It was a flat area near the base of a small hill, not far from a creek. There was a clearing big enough for a tent and a good spot to hang food away from animals. I took off my pack and started setting up. The routine helped me focus. I pitched the tent, gathered some wood, and boiled water for dinner. By the time I was eating, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. That feeling hadn't gone away, though. If anything, it had gotten worse. I kept turning my head, convinced I'd seen movement in the trees, but every time I looked, there was nothing. I told myself again that it was just nerves. Maybe I had been spending too much time indoors lately, and now my brain was overreacting to the quiet. I forced myself to relax and turned in early. I zipped into my sleeping bag, listened to the wind, and eventually drifted off. But I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up at odd hours. Once, I thought I heard something like soft footsteps outside the tent. But when I held my breath and listened, it was just silence again. I didn't go outside to check. I didn't want to admit I was scared. In the morning, I packed up quickly. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just wanted to get moving. My legs felt stiff, and my back was sore from the night, but the cold morning air helped shake it off. I rejoined the trail and headed deeper into the loop. By midday, I was high up along a ridge with a good view of the valley below. The air was thinner, cooler. I took a break and drank some water. The trail looked like it hadn't been used in months. Grass and weeds had grown in the center of it, and fallen branches hadn't been cleared. I knew it wasn't a popular route, but this made it feel downright abandoned. Still, everything was going okay until about an hour later when it all went wrong. I was coming down a steep slope, navigating carefully over rocks and loose gravel. I stepped on what looked like a solid patch of dirt, but it gave way under my foot. My ankle twisted sideways, and I fell hard onto my side. My pack cushioned the blow, but my leg was in instant pain. I tried to stand, but as soon as I put weight on it, a sharp jolt shot up from my ankle to my knee. I sat there for a long time trying to breathe through the pain. I hoped it was just a sprain. I pulled off my boot and sock, and the swelling had already started. My ankle looked fat and misshapen. Not broken, maybe, but definitely bad. The reality hit hard. I was about 15 kilometers from the trailhead. I had no cell signal. Nobody knew exactly where I was. I had told a friend I'd be doing a loop in this area, but I hadn't given him precise coordinates. Even if I tried to send for help, it would be hours, if not days, before someone came this far. And that was assuming they knew where to look. I wrapped the ankle tight with a bandage from my kit, pulled my boot back on as best as I could, and used a thick branch as a makeshift crutch. I hobbled forward, slowly. Every step hurt. I tried to keep my weight on the stick and my good leg, but I was still moving painfully slow. And then I noticed the tracks. At first, I thought they were animal prints. But the more I looked, the more I realized they were human boot prints, clear and deep, going in the same direction as me but slightly off the trail, like someone was following parallel to it but trying not to be seen. I stopped and stared at them for a long time. The hair on my neck stood up. They didn't look old. They looked recent. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't in any shape to run. I couldn't backtrack either. I didn't want to call out. If someone was there, they hadn't made themselves known for a reason. I had to keep moving. The rest of the day was a slow, painful crawl. I drank more water than I should have. My limp grew worse and my ankle throbbed constantly. Around 4 p.m., I passed a broken-down wooden shelter that wasn't on my map. It looked like it had been built a long time ago and then abandoned, maybe by a hunter or a ranger. The roof was partially caved in, and the wood was dark with rot. But it was shelter. I dragged myself inside and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. I was too tired to eat. My stomach turned at the thought of food. My hands were shaking from the cold and the pain. The woods outside were quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind. Nothing. I must have dozed off at some point, but I woke up suddenly. The sun was gone. It was dark. I couldn't see much outside the shelter except the faint glow of moonlight through the trees. But I could hear something. Not close, but not far either. It sounded like sticks breaking, slowly, one at a time, like someone walking, not an animal. The rhythm was too careful, too human. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I sat in the dark, clutching the handle of my hiking knife, trying to stay completely still. The sound faded after a while. I don't know how long I waited, maybe an hour. Eventually, I laid down and pulled my coat tight over me and just prayed for daylight. When the sun finally came up, I got out of there fast. I didn't even care how much it hurt to walk. I just needed to get out. I followed the trail as best I could, but I was running on fumes. I was tired, dehydrated, in pain, and scared. Every few minutes, I looked over my shoulder. I never saw anyone, but that didn't help. I had about 9 kilometers left. Took me almost 10 hours. My pace was slow, and I had to stop constantly. At one point, I fell again and landed hard on my elbow. Started to bleed, but I didn't care. I just needed to move. I finally saw the parking lot through the trees around 5 p.m. My car was still there. Nothing had been touched. I unlocked it, crawled inside, locked the doors, and just sat there for a while before driving off. My hands were shaking. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My ankle was swollen like a grapefruit. Back in town, I went straight to urgent care. The doctor said the ankle was a bad sprain and that I'd need crutches for a while. I nodded along and thanked him, but my mind was somewhere else. It's been weeks since then. My ankle's healing. I've been back at work. Life looks normal on the surface, but I keep thinking about those boot prints. I keep hearing the sticks snapping at night in my dreams. I didn't imagine it. I know I didn't. Somebody was out there. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who didn't help when I was hurt. I've been on dozens of hikes in my life. I've done solo trips that lasted days. But something changed in me after that. I was always the type of person who liked being alone in nature. Not because I hated people or anything like that, but because being out there by myself just made everything feel quieter, simpler, easier to understand. Hiking was my escape. It started as a weekend hobby, something I did on local trails just to disconnect from everything. But over the years, it turned into something bigger. I started pushing further and further out, picking trails that weren't as popular, places people didn't bother with because they were too remote or took too long to finish. This story happened in late August, in a national forest that spans several counties. I won't name it because I don't want anyone thinking this is an invitation to go out there. If anything, I'm telling this so maybe someone won't do the same stupid thing I did. I planned a solo 3-day hike through a long, winding trail deep into the woods, one that looped around a few ridges and climbed into some rougher elevations before coming back down. It wasn't marked well, but I had a paper map, GPS, and extra batteries. I had done all the prep. Weather was clear, my bag had everything I needed. I had told my brother the general area I'd be in. He wasn't a hiker, but he promised to check in with me every day by evening text. I had no signal out there, but I told him if he didn't hear from me by the morning after the 3rd day, to call someone. I started early in the morning. The first day was smooth, dry trail, sun out, not too hot. I made about 12 miles by late afternoon, set up camp in a clearing near a dry creek bed, ate a freeze-dried meal, and fell asleep listening to the wind in the trees. There was no one else around. It was just quiet. Perfect. Second day, I pushed deeper in. The trees got thicker, trail rougher, lots of steep sections going up the sides of hills. I passed a few old logging markers nailed to trees and a rusted fence that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. There were no signs of people, no litter, no footprints, nothing. That's usually a good thing. I kept going, made it to a ridge with a clear view of the valley below. You could see for miles, nothing but forest in every direction. That view was the last thing that felt good. I was following a less traveled offshoot trail that cut through a part of the woods marked on my map as seasonally accessible. I figured it meant muddy or snow-covered in winter, but it was dry now, so I kept going. About 3 miles into that section, the trail got hard to follow. It hadn't been maintained. Down trees, brush growing over the path, lots of spots where I had to check the compass and map just to stay on track. I should have turned back, but I told myself it was fine, just rough trail. I still had daylight, plenty of food and water, and a backup power bank for my GPS. So I pushed on. By late afternoon, I was about 20 miles from where I had started. That's when I noticed something that didn't sit right. The forest looked off. The trees were the same, but there were no animals anymore. No birds, no bugs, no squirrels. Just this stillness that felt unnatural. I brushed it off as being deep enough that animals just kept away from people. But it still bothered me. I set up camp early that night near a narrow stream, just enough water to refill bottles. I built a small fire, sat by it until dark, and crawled into my tent. That night I couldn't sleep well. There were noises, not wildlife, but something heavier. Something that moved in a slow, deliberate way through the trees just outside the range of the firelight. Every time I thought it stopped, I'd hear a soft crunch again. Once I even heard what sounded like something brushing against my tent, just for a second. I sat up with my headlamp on, knife in hand, frozen. It stopped. I stayed like that for an hour before I finally laid back down. I told myself it was a deer, a big raccoon maybe, but I didn't believe it. Next morning, I stepped outside the tent and saw footprints. Not mine, human ones, bare feet. They were faint but fresh, circling the campsite once and then vanishing into the brush. I just stood there, staring at them for a long time. My mind didn't want to accept it. Who the hell was out here barefoot? I hadn't seen another person since I started. No one else would be this deep without gear. I packed everything fast. Didn't even eat breakfast. Just wanted to get back to the main trail and start heading toward the loop exit. I was done. The uneasiness had turned into something heavier. A tight pressure in my chest, like something was watching me the whole time. But the trail was gone. I swear I followed the same direction I came from, same landmarks, same compass heading, but nothing matched. The map didn't make sense anymore. There were ridges where there shouldn't be, trees that didn't line up with the markers, and the stream I had camped by was gone. I started going in the direction I thought the trail had to be, but after 2 hours of walking, I was just deeper in. My GPS worked, but it only told me my coordinates. It didn't help if the map was useless. My phone had no signal. I climbed a low ridge hoping for better view. All I saw was more trees, just endless forest. That's when I realized I wasn't just lost. I was in real danger. I kept walking, stopped every hour to check bearings, look for anything familiar. Around midday, I found something that gave me a small sense of hope. A piece of an old trail marker, rotting wood nailed into a tree with faded red paint. I headed toward it and saw what looked like a barely visible old path leading north. I followed it. That's when everything went downhill, literally and figuratively. The trail led into a narrow valley with high walls on both sides. Steep, rocky slopes, thick with trees. Once I was in, it was like walking through a tunnel of green. The light dimmed. The air felt colder. I followed the trail another mile before it just ended, like someone had erased it. No more markers, just thick brush, a mess of fallen trees, and a steep drop into a rocky creek bed below. I thought about turning back, but I didn't want to waste time. I figured if I dropped into the creek, I could follow the water out. Water leads somewhere, right? It was a mistake. Climbing down into that creek bed took half an hour. Slippery rocks, loose gravel, torn up hands. When I reached the bottom, I slipped and banged my knee on a stone. Hurt like hell. I checked, no break, but it swelled up fast. I wrapped it tight, but walking was harder. I started moving downstream anyway, one careful step at a time. The banks were too steep to climb out, and the water was shallow, maybe ankle deep, filled with rocks and moss. After maybe another 2 hours, I saw something ahead. A small structure, not a cabin, more like a broken shack, half collapsed and grown over with vines. Just standing there against the side of the creek bank like it had been forgotten decades ago. I was too tired to feel excited, but I limped over to it anyway. It had no door, just a rotting frame and part of a roof. Inside was some old junk, rusted cans, a busted stove, torn cloth. Nothing useful, but the strangest part was what was carved into one of the walls. Dozens of lines slashed into the wood, like tally marks, hundreds of them. Some were deep, some were shallow. No words, no explanation. I didn't want to stay there. I kept moving. Not long after I left the shack behind, I realized I wasn't alone again. I didn't hear anything at first, but I felt it, the same feeling I'd had the night before. That pressure on the back of my neck, like eyes were on me. Then I saw movement, up on the ridge above the creek. A shadow between two trees. It moved fast and disappeared. I stopped walking, waited, nothing. I moved again. Then I heard something behind me, a soft splash. I turned fast, but there was nothing, just ripples in the water. I started walking faster, limping really. My knee was worse. Every step felt like something sharp jabbing into it. I wanted to rest, but I didn't dare stop. Not now. The trees closed in tighter on the sides of the creek. The light dimmed again. Then I heard it clearly, footsteps behind me. Not animal, not splashing. Soft, slow, wet steps. I spun around, again, nothing. But this time I knew I wasn't imagining it. I picked up a rock, just held it in my hand. It made me feel like I had some control, even though I knew it wouldn't help. As the sun started going down, the creek turned into a narrow gap between two steep hills. I was trapped, couldn't climb out, had to keep following it. I was exhausted, limping badly, half-starved, and my water was low. That's when I saw the trap. It was barely hidden. A loop of wire strung between two rocks, set just beneath the water line. I almost stepped in it. Someone had said it recently. It was old wire, sure, but not rusted. That meant someone had been here, maybe even lived out here. But who the hell was trapping in the middle of nowhere? I backed away from it and kept moving. I didn't want to find whoever said that, but I did. About half a mile later, the creek opened up into a flat area where it split around a large boulder. In the dirt near the boulder were more prints. Human again, barefoot, only this time fresher. I'm not the kind of person who usually takes big risks. I've always liked hiking, but I kept it simple. I stayed on the trails, stuck to the rules, kept my gear light, and always told someone where I was going. That's how I was raised. But that weekend, I let my guard down. I wanted something different. I wanted to feel a little bit lost, to feel like I was really out in the wild. I didn't want to admit that to anyone, but I think deep down, that was the real reason I strayed off the main trail. It started on a Friday morning. I had driven out the night before and slept in the back of my car near the entrance to a trail system in the northern part of my state. The area was remote, hours away from anything that looked like a town. Just long stretches of forested road, rough gravel paths, and worn-down Forest Service signs half covered in moss. I woke up early, ate a plain breakfast, oats, some almonds, a banana, then checked my bag one last time. I had everything. Food for 3 days, my compass, GPS unit, headlamp, extra batteries, emergency blanket, stove, a water filter, the whole list. I even brought bear spray, though I had never had to use it before. The plan was simple. Hike in for a day and a half, set up camp, spend a quiet evening by the lake I had read about online, then hike back out by Sunday. The path I picked was mostly flat, heavily wooded, and barely known by weekend hikers. That was exactly what I wanted: quiet, peace, nature. And that's what I got for the first several hours. The trail was calm, a little muddy from rain earlier in the week, but not bad. I crossed a few creeks, saw a couple of deer, watched some squirrels fight over a pine cone. My GPS showed I was on the right track. I had cell reception for the first couple of hours, so I sent a final message to my brother to let him know I was heading in deeper. Then I turned the phone off and kept walking. By the time it hit late afternoon, the light was starting to fade and the trail was thinning out. That part didn't bother me. I had planned for a wide loop around a lake, then a straight shot east on a secondary trail that would eventually reconnect with the main one. But somewhere around 4 or 5 p.m., I came across a fork in the trail that wasn't on my map. It looked fresh, like maybe someone had cut the branches back in the last year. The main trail kept going north, but the smaller path veered southeast. My GPS didn't show the side path at all. I stood there for a while, sweating under my pack and staring down that path. It looked like it might cut time. It followed the direction of my end goal, and I started wondering if it might be an older logging road or a game trail that the maps missed. The idea of saving a couple of hours started to tempt me. I was tired, my legs ached, and I told myself that if I kept checking my compass and backtracked if things got weird, I'd be fine. So I went down the path. The first mile or two was uneventful. The trail narrowed a bit, and branches reached out like arms from both sides, but the ground was solid. My compass showed I was heading in the general direction I wanted. That gave me confidence. But then things started to change slowly. The woods got denser, the trees grew closer together, and the light had a hard time making it through. The sound of birds disappeared, little by little replaced by silence. Not total silence, but the kind that made every step of mine sound louder. The kind of silence that made the back of your neck feel colder than the air should be. I started seeing less animal sign. No tracks, no scat, not even rustled leaves. Just a lot of stillness, like the forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. I told myself that animals don't always leave clues, that maybe the trail wasn't used much and the wildlife just kept away from it. But the longer I walked, the more I felt like I wasn't alone. Not watched exactly, not yet, but like something was ahead of me, maybe even behind me, like I was walking into something I didn't understand. I kept checking my GPS, but the signal had dropped. I held it up, walked around, tried turning it off and back on, but nothing. Just an empty screen where the map should have been. My compass still worked, though, and it told me I was going southeast. That matched my original plan, so I kept going. I told myself I'd reconnect with the main trail soon. By the time the sun started dipping low, I realized I hadn't seen a single marker, blaze, or signpost in hours. Even the overgrown trail I was following began to fade. It wasn't just narrowing, it was disappearing. Tree roots started breaking it up. Low brush forced me to push my way through. I had to stop more often to check my compass, and that's when I started to hear things. First, it was just movement. Something in the trees just out of sight. Not big enough to be a bear, but not small like a squirrel either. A steady rustling, always off to the side. Every time I stopped and looked, it stopped too. When I moved again, it would pick up. I wasn't sure if it was one thing or several, but it never sounded too close. That made it worse. It was just far enough to not see it, but close enough to hear it clearly. I wanted to believe it was just deer, maybe elk, maybe they were just curious, but I couldn't hear hooves or any animal sounds. Just that soft, steady movement. Not crashing, not thrashing. Just quiet rustling like something that didn't want to be noticed. I kept walking faster now. My shoulders were starting to burn under the straps of my pack, and my legs were getting heavier with each step. I slipped once on a damp patch of moss, went down hard on my left side, and scraped my arm. Blood started seeping out in thin lines, and I had to stop to disinfect it. I crouched low, watching the trees around me the whole time, but nothing moved. I wrapped it up, stood, and pushed forward again. Eventually, I reached a dry creek bed. It looked deep and ran from the west to the southeast. I figured if I followed it down, I might reach the lake, or at least something familiar. It wasn't a trail, but it was something. I climbed down into the rocky bed and walked. The sides rose high on both ends, and I felt boxed in. The walls of dirt and rock created a kind of tunnel, and the trees overhead blocked most of the remaining light. That's when the smell started. It was faint at first, something sour, sharp, and thick in the air, like rot. Not like a dead animal you find in the woods. This was older, more soaked into the air. I held my shirt over my nose and kept going, telling myself it might be from a decaying tree or stagnant water. But then I saw the boot. It was half buried in mud, dark brown leather, worn out. Not torn or broken, just left there, stuck in the middle of the creek bed like someone had walked right out of it. I stopped and stared at it for a while. There were no tracks around it, no other belongings, just one boot. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to know if there was a foot inside it. I just stood there, heart pounding, ears ringing in the quiet. Then I moved around it and kept walking faster. The farther I followed the creek, the worse things got. The smell got stronger. The air grew thicker, heavier. Then I saw more things. Broken branches stacked in strange ways, old scraps of cloth caught on limbs, deep gashes in tree trunks that looked too wide to be made by an animal. I stopped again, trying to catch my breath, trying to figure out where I was. My compass needle started spinning slowly. I tapped it, waited. It kept turning, like it couldn't find north. That's when the fear started to really settle in. Real fear, not nerves, not the tension I'd felt earlier. This was different. This was cold, deep fear that settled into my gut and made my hands shake. I thought about turning back, but I didn't know if I could retrace my steps. Everything looked different now. The trees all looked the same. The creek bed stretched on in both directions like it had no end. I felt trapped. Then I heard it, not rustling this time. Footsteps, soft, slow, and steady, coming from behind me. I turned fast, scanning the rim of the creek bed above me, but saw nothing, just trees and shadows. The steps stopped when I turned. I waited, held my breath. Nothing. I started walking again, faster. My boots scraped over the loose rocks. My breathing grew louder. I couldn't tell if the steps were still there or if I was imagining them now. Everything felt too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. After maybe 20 more minutes of walking, I came across something that made my stomach drop. A backpack, old, sun-faded with torn straps, lying beside the dry creek bed. I approached slowly, heart hammering. It looked like it had been there for a long time. I didn't want to touch it, but I had to know. I nudged it with my boot. It was light, mostly empty. I saw a rolled-up sock inside, a rusted spoon, an empty water bottle, and a map that had rotted into unreadable mush. I left it there. I didn't want to know anything more about who it had belonged to. I just wanted to get out. At that point, I started climbing out of the creek bed. The slope was steep and the ground loose, but I pulled myself up using roots and rocks. When I reached the top, I looked around and saw something that finally gave me hope. I started that hike on a Wednesday morning in early September. I had taken the week off work to get away from the noise of the city, the emails, the phone calls, and just everything that came with my job. I'd been planning to hike through a national forest in northern Montana. The trail I picked was long, about 30 miles in total, but I planned to do a big loop, 15 miles out, camp overnight near a lake, then 15 miles back the next day. I packed my gear carefully: food, water filter, tarp, sleeping bag, stove, flashlight, batteries, knife, bear spray, even a GPS beacon just in case. I knew how remote the place was. The drive there was long. Once I got off the paved roads and onto the dirt ones, I saw fewer and fewer cars. Eventually, by the time I parked my car near the trailhead, I hadn't seen another vehicle for almost an hour. That's when I should have paused for a second. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it. The area was beautiful. Dense pine trees, mossy rocks, the smell of dirt and leaves. But there was a strange silence. No birds, no bugs, not even wind in the trees. It was too quiet. I shrugged it off. I figured maybe the season had changed early, or the air pressure was just odd that morning. I started hiking. The trail was narrow but well maintained. I had it all to myself. I didn't see a single person in the first few miles. I liked it that way. The trees were tall and packed tightly together. Every now and then, the woods would open up into a clearing, and I'd get a glimpse of mountains in the distance. I kept a steady pace. The goal was to make it to the lake before sunset, set up camp, cook dinner, then rest for the night. Around mile 6, I started getting that feeling again, that strange pressure in my chest. I stopped to catch my breath and drink some water. I scanned the woods around me. Nothing moved. I waited a few more seconds, then kept walking. That's when I noticed something off just barely. The pine needles on the trail behind me were slightly scuffed, like someone else had walked over them not long ago. I knew how my own boots looked in the dirt, and these were a bit wider. I thought maybe someone else was hiking the same trail behind me. Still, I hadn't heard anything. No footfalls, no branches snapping, no voices. By the time I reached mile 10, the sun had started to drop behind the tree line. The shadows stretched across the trail like long black fingers. I felt watched. It was a deep feeling in my gut, the kind that makes your skin crawl even if you can't prove anything is wrong. I didn't see anyone, but every few minutes I thought I heard something soft behind me. Not animals, something heavy, slow, and deliberate. I stopped and looked behind me 5 or 6 times, but the woods just stood there, still and silent. I picked up my pace. I didn't run, but I walked fast. I didn't even stop to take pictures or look at my map anymore. I just wanted to get to the lake. It was dark by the time I got to the camping spot. I could barely see the lake through the trees, but I could hear the soft waves against the shore. I set up my tarp and sleeping bag quickly, keeping my flashlight low. I felt exposed. I didn't make a fire. I didn't want anyone or anything to know where I was. I ate a cold dinner from my backpack, then sat with my back against a tree, staring into the woods. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound, every little crack of a twig or rustle in the bushes made my heart race. I kept my knife in one hand and the bear spray in the other. At one point, maybe around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps. Not an animal. 2 feet, moving slow through dry leaves. Then they stopped. I didn't move. I held my breath. I waited for what felt like 10 minutes. Then nothing. Silence again. I couldn't sleep after that. I just waited for the sun to come up. When it finally did, I packed my stuff as fast as I could and started hiking back. My legs were tired. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I just wanted to get out of there. The trail looked different in daylight, but not in a good way. The bushes seemed thicker, the shadows darker. Every time the trail bent or curved, I worried what I'd find around the corner. A few miles in, I saw it. There were footprints, clear ones, off to the side of the trail. They led from the woods to the edge of the path and stopped right where I had passed the day before. Big prints. Hiking boots, but not mine. I crouched down and looked closer. The tracks weren't old. The edges were crisp. They were fresh, probably made that morning. They weren't from a ranger. There were no vehicle tracks, no horse tracks, no signs anyone should be out here except me. That's when I started moving fast. I didn't run yet, but I was walking as quickly as I could without tripping. I kept looking over my shoulder. Nothing, but I could feel it. Someone was there, hiding, following, just like yesterday. By mile 20, my legs were shaking. I was drinking water constantly and chewing on energy bars just to keep going. I was still alone. I hadn't seen a single hiker or camper. No planes above. No distant sounds of cars. Nothing. Then I saw something that made my stomach turn. Up ahead on the trail, stuck in the bark of a tree, was a small piece of blue cloth, torn, about the size of a hand. It looked like a piece of someone's shirt, but it hadn't been there yesterday. I was sure of it. I took a step closer and looked around. That's when I saw another one. Farther down, tied to a branch. Then another. 3 scraps, spaced apart like markers. I didn't like that. Not one bit. I took out my knife again and held it in my hand as I walked. The bear spray was clipped to my belt, but I made sure it was ready to grab. At that point, I stopped caring how crazy I looked. I just wanted to make it back to my car. Around mile 23, I lost the trail. It was my fault. I think I was too shaken. I missed a turn and walked straight into a thick part of the woods. I realized it after about 5 minutes when the trail just faded under my feet and disappeared. I turned around. That's when I saw the boot print, right where I had walked. But this one was deeper, like someone had stood there, watching. That was the first time I actually started running. I ran through the woods, pushing through branches, tripping over roots. I kept trying to find the trail again. After what felt like forever, I stumbled back onto it. My arms were scratched up, and I was covered in sweat, but I didn't stop. Mile 25, I heard a noise behind me, a real one this time. A snapping branch, clear, sharp, like someone had stepped right on it. I didn't stop to look. I just ran harder. My backpack bounced with every step, and my water bottle hit my hip over and over. I could barely breathe. My throat was dry, and my legs felt like they were burning. Then I saw it, my car. It was still parked at the trailhead, covered in dust. I almost cried when I saw it. I ran straight for it, unlocked it with shaking hands, threw my backpack inside, and slammed the door shut. I sat there, breathing hard, looking back at the trail. Nothing came out. I waited for 10 minutes before starting the engine. I kept watching the tree line. I still couldn't see anyone, but I knew they had been there. Someone had followed me. Someone had marked the trail. Someone had watched me sleep. The drive back to the nearest town took over 2 hours. I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I didn't even turn on the radio. My hands didn't stop shaking until I was back on the highway. I went straight to a ranger station and reported what happened. I showed them the map, told them about the footprints, the cloth scraps, the sounds, everything. They asked me a few questions and said they'd check it out. But I could tell they didn't seem too concerned. Maybe they'd heard it before. Maybe it wasn't the first time. That night, I stayed in a motel. I locked the door and pushed a chair against it. I couldn't sleep again. Every sound outside made me jump. A week later, I got a call from the park office. They said they found a campsite not far from where I had stayed. Not mine, a hidden one. No tent, just a tarp, some food wrappers, and what looked like a small notebook. They didn't say much else, just that it wasn't an official site and that they were still looking into it. I haven't gone hiking alone since, and now, no matter where I go, even in the city, I can't stop looking over my shoulder. It was early October when I decided to go hiking alone in a remote part of northern Montana. I had taken a week off work and wanted to spend it off the grid, somewhere quiet, far from my usual routines, noise, and people. I was looking for isolation, real deep solitude, and I thought the best way to find that was to go off the main trails, deep into the forest where hardly anyone went. I didn't tell many people my full plan. I just said I was going hiking up north. I had my gear, my pack, plenty of food, a small tent, first aid kit, GPS, and backup batteries. I thought I was well prepared. I had hiked a lot in the past, done multi-day trips before, and I figured this one wouldn't be any different. I parked my car near an old gravel road that hadn't been used much. The gravel was barely there anymore, mostly just weeds and soft earth with tire tracks from what looked like Forest Service trucks. I locked the doors, checked my pack one last time, and started walking. There was a cold wind blowing through the trees even in the afternoon, but I welcomed it. It felt good to be out in the wild. The sky was mostly clear, and the light came through the trees in soft beams, highlighting the patches of yellow and orange leaves scattered across the forest floor. Everything was quiet except for the occasional chirping bird or the sound of branches creaking above. My plan was to hike out about 12 miles over 2 days to a small river that showed up on topographic maps. The river didn't have a name on the maps I had, and I liked that. I wanted to set up camp near that river and spend a day or two fishing, sitting by the fire, and just letting my head go quiet. The first day went smoothly. The trail wasn't really a trail after a couple of miles, just a suggestion through the trees. I followed the GPS and my printed map. I made it about 6 miles in before I started setting up camp. I was in a clearing surrounded by tall pine trees, the ground covered in pine needles and small rocks. I pitched the tent, got a fire going with some dry wood, boiled some water, and made a simple freeze-dried meal. I felt good, content, calm. The wind died down at night and the forest grew still. Around midnight, I woke up needing to pee. I got out of the tent with my flashlight and walked a little way into the trees. It was quiet, too quiet maybe, but I didn't think anything of it. I did what I had to do, zipped up, and started walking back toward the tent. Then I saw something that made me stop. There were 2 parallel lines of footprints that had come from deeper in the forest and stopped right next to my tent. They were fresh, not mine. I hadn't seen anyone out here, not a single soul all day. These prints were heavy, deep, and close together like the person had been walking slowly. They stopped just a foot away from my tent door and then turned back into the woods. I froze. My first thought was maybe someone else was camping nearby, but there hadn't been any signs of another person. No smoke, no distant campfire smell, no voices. I stood there staring at the footprints with the flashlight in my shaking hand. Then I started scanning the woods in front of me, moving the light slowly from tree to tree. Nothing, just the dark space between trunks, the thick underbrush, and more trees behind that. I stayed like that for about 10 minutes before I finally moved. I quietly walked up to my tent, unzipped it, and got back inside. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. In the morning, I packed up quickly and decided to keep going toward the river. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was some hunter passing through. Still, I felt a strange tension in my chest that hadn't been there the day before. I kept looking back every few minutes as I walked. The forest was quiet again, maybe too quiet. I didn't hear birds like I usually did in the mornings, just the sound of my boots on dirt and leaves. Around noon, I stopped for lunch, sitting on a large flat rock and eating a protein bar and some trail mix. I looked around again, scanning the forest. Nothing moved. I told myself I was being stupid. But then, when I got up to leave, I noticed something again. My boot prints were joined by another set. They had come from the side, curved close to where I had been sitting, and then disappeared into the woods again. Whoever it was, they were close, and they were following me. I picked up my pace, hiking harder, sweating even though it was cold. The river was still another few miles away. The trail got harder as the land sloped upward and the trees grew tighter. I pushed through thorny bushes and ducked under low branches. My arms were getting scratched up and my pack kept catching on vines and roots, but I didn't stop. Every few minutes I checked behind me. Nothing. but I knew someone was there. I could feel it. You can't really explain that feeling until you've had it. Like your body knows something your mind is trying to ignore. When I finally reached the river, I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. It was narrow, maybe 20 feet across, shallow in places, and winding between the trees. I found a small flat patch near the bank to set up camp. I thought maybe if I camped near the water, I could listen for anyone approaching. The current would mask my movements, too. I didn't light a fire that night. I ate cold food, stayed inside the tent, and kept my flashlight close. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. But just before dawn, I woke up again. Not because I had to pee, not because of a noise, but because I felt something. I lay there still, not moving, breathing slowly, listening. Then I heard it. A single, quiet footstep outside the tent. Then another. Then silence. I held my breath. My hands were sweating, and I could feel my heart thudding so hard I thought it might give me away. I waited. Then I heard something soft brush the side of the tent. Not the wind. A slow, dragging touch, like someone was running their hand along the fabric. I stayed still, barely breathing. I didn't have a weapon other than a small hatchet in my pack. My knife was outside near the fire ring. I didn't want to move, didn't want to make a sound. I just lay there, eyes wide open, waiting. Eventually, the sounds stopped. No more steps, no more movement. I waited at least another hour, maybe two. The sun started to rise. Pale gray light filled the tent. I slowly unzipped the flap and looked outside. There were more footprints, close to the tent, fresh. They had come from the woods, circled around, and gone back into the trees. I got up, packed everything as fast as I could, and decided I was going back. I couldn't enjoy the trip. Not now. I didn't want to know who was out there. I just wanted to leave. But going back wasn't easy. The forest looked different now. I took what I thought was the same path, but I kept getting turned around. I checked the GPS, but the signal was weak and sometimes cut out completely. I had a compass and a map too, but the trees were so thick in places it was hard to get any landmarks. After a while, I realized I had been walking in a large circle. My boot prints showed up again, old ones pointing in the wrong direction. I had gotten turned around badly. I stopped, tried to calm myself, drank some water, and studied the map again. I chose a new direction and forced myself to keep going straight. I started marking trees with small notches in the bark so I could tell if I was looping. The whole day passed like that. No lunch, just moving fast, heart racing, eyes darting everywhere. I felt watched, not just paranoid, watched. At one point, I looked up and saw a dark shape behind a tree, maybe 100 feet away, human-shaped, tall. Then it was gone. When I ran over, nothing was there, but the pine needles were disturbed, freshly stepped on. I kept walking until it got too dark. I had no choice but to stop again. I didn't pitch the tent. I just found a shallow spot under some branches, wrapped myself in my tarp, and sat with my back to a tree. I didn't sleep. Every snap of a twig made my head turn. I felt like prey, like someone out there was playing with me. The next morning, my legs ached and my feet were blistered. I hadn't eaten properly in over a day. I was exhausted, but I forced myself to keep walking. Around noon, I finally reached a familiar rock formation, a tall, sharp outcrop I had seen on the first day. I knew the road was only a couple miles past it. I moved faster now, pushing through the last stretch of forest. I was maybe 15 minutes from the road when I saw something that stopped me cold. In a clearing up ahead, there was a pile of sticks and bones. Real bones. Animal bones, I thought at first. But then I got closer and saw a boot next to them. An old boot, weather-worn, and a backpack, torn up. The bones were bleached white, scattered, but the shape was clear. It had been a person. There was no ID, nothing useful inside the pack. Just scraps of fabric, a crushed metal canteen, and a faded patch that looked like it might have been from some hiking group. I didn't stick around long. I kept moving, heart pounding, legs burning. When I finally reached the gravel road, I almost cried. My car was still there. I unlocked it, threw my pack inside, and drove. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station 2 hours south. I cleaned up in their bathroom, bought a sandwich. I remember the day I decided to go hiking like it was yesterday. It was a Monday morning in late October, and I had just come off a rough few weeks at work. I work in IT, mostly behind a desk, dealing with network problems, software bugs, and stressed out coworkers. I had been staying up too late, skipping meals, drinking too much coffee, and not sleeping right. I could feel it catching up with me. My hands were shaky, my eyes burned, and everything felt heavy. I needed a break, something real, something outside. So, I packed a bag and drove out to a national forest area about 2 hours from home. It wasn't a big park, not one of those popular ones full of tourists and influencers taking pictures of their hiking boots. This place was quieter, a lot more rugged. It had a reputation for being underdeveloped compared to the others. Fewer signs, fewer maps, but the land was supposed to be beautiful. Rolling hills, dense forest, and a river that curved all the way through the valley. I brought what I thought I needed. A good pack, 2 bottles of water, some beef jerky, a pack of almonds, 2 protein bars, a basic first aid kit, flashlight, backup batteries, a flannel jacket, a windbreaker, and an old but sturdy pair of hiking boots. My phone was charged and had offline maps downloaded. I didn't bring a tent since I wasn't planning to stay overnight. Just a solid day hike to clear my head. The trail I picked ran near the river and looped back around. Supposed to be about 15 kilometers, give or take. I figured 5 hours, maybe 6 if I took breaks. I parked my car at a gravel lot near the trailhead around 8 a.m. There were only 2 other cars parked, one dusty sedan and an old truck with some camping gear in the back. I stepped out of my car, took a breath of the cool autumn air, and stretched. It smelled like wet leaves and pine. There had been rain the night before, and the ground was still damp. My boots sank slightly into the mud as I stepped out. I started walking just after 8:15. The trail was narrow and already felt wild. No signs of maintenance. Fallen branches crisscrossed the path in places, and yellow leaves stuck to the wet earth. The trees were mostly oaks and maples, their leaves turning orange and red, some already bare. The forest felt calm. I remember liking the silence at first. The only sounds were my boots pressing into the damp trail and the soft rush of the river somewhere nearby. About an hour in, I reached the edge of the river. It was wider than I imagined, probably 30 feet across, with water moving at a moderate pace. The water was clear but looked cold. Jagged rocks lined the banks, and some large, flat stones jutted out into the stream. I stood there for a while just listening. The river had that low, constant sound like wind dragging over gravel. I remember feeling peaceful then, really peaceful. I followed the trail as it hugged the river for several kilometers. At one point, the path dipped lower, closer to the water. That's when things started to feel off. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a slow change. The trail got narrower and more uneven, like nobody had walked it in months. Tree roots cut across the path more often, and some of the muddy ground had deep shoe-shaped indentations that had long since dried. At one bend, I saw a boot print that had filled with rainwater. It wasn't mine. It was bigger than mine. That didn't bother me at first. Plenty of people hike these trails, but something about it felt strange. The way the print was angled, almost like someone had stood facing the woods instead of facing the trail. I stepped over it and kept walking. About 30 minutes later, I reached a small clearing near the bend of the river. It was about the size of a backyard, flat and open. A fire pit sat near the center with blackened rocks and bits of charred wood. Someone had camped here recently. Pieces of plastic and aluminum foil were scattered around, half buried in the mud. There was even a crumpled energy drink can and a broken folding chair leaning against a log. I remember standing there, feeling like I had stepped into someone else's space. Something about the mess felt careless, not like a tired camper left in a hurry, more like someone just didn't care. I took a sip of water, looked around, and kept going. Soon after that, I started feeling like I was being watched. I know how that sounds, but it didn't come all at once. Crept in slowly. I'd stop to take a sip of water and suddenly feel like I wasn't alone. No sound, no movement, just a sense that something was nearby. The woods felt tighter. The trees leaned closer to the trail. The air felt heavier, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. I kept checking over my shoulder. I even started walking faster without meaning to. About 2 hours after I started, I came across something that truly stopped me. It was a jacket, an old army green one, hanging on a branch about 5 feet off the ground. The branch was clean, no thorns, no leaves, just sticking out like a coat rack. The jacket was zipped up halfway, and it had a large rip along the left sleeve, as if it had snagged on something. It looked wet, fresh. I stood there staring at it for too long. My gut told me not to touch it, not to move it, just walk past. But I didn't. I stepped closer and looked around. There were no footprints nearby, no signs that someone had stood there, just the jacket hanging perfectly. I took a photo of it with my phone, then started moving again, faster this time. Maybe 20 minutes later, I lost the trail. I didn't realize it at first. The path just sort of thinned out gradually. One moment it was narrow but clear, and the next it was gone. Just wet leaves and scattered sticks in every direction. I looked around, backtracked a few steps, but nothing looked right. The trees all looked the same. I pulled out my phone and checked the offline map. I could see my location, but the trail line had ended. I must have wandered onto an unmarked deer path or something. I turned north to try to intersect the river again, figuring I could follow it back. That's when I heard something behind me. It wasn't an animal sound. Not a twig snap or rustling leaves. It was a clunk, a hard sound like wood hitting rock. I stopped walking and waited. Nothing. I scanned the trees behind me. Nothing moved. I kept going. 10 steps later, I heard it again. I didn't run. Not yet. I just walked faster, making more noise than before. My boots slapped the wet leaves. I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the cold air. I heard that clunking sound again, closer this time. I didn't look back. I just moved. Soon I hit the river again. I followed it, hoping it would lead me back toward the trailhead or at least a familiar turn. But the riverbanks were steep and muddy. At one point, I slipped and landed hard on my side. Mud covered my jacket, and one of my water bottles rolled down the slope into the river. I stood up, sore and shaky, and kept moving. The sun was starting to dip low now, casting long shadows through the trees. I had been walking for hours, probably in circles. I hadn't seen another person all day. No voices, no distant sounds. Just that occasional clunk behind me that would stop every time I stopped. Eventually, I saw something ahead, another campsite. But this one was different. There was no fire pit, no tent, just a blue tarp strung low between 2 trees, sagging in the middle from rainwater. Under it was a torn sleeping bag and a pile of what looked like empty snack wrappers. Some duct tape hung from one tree like it had been used to fasten something. The whole setup looked abandoned and rushed. But the thing that made my stomach drop was the pile of bones just 10 feet from the tarp. They were small, probably from a deer, but they were piled together too neatly, almost stacked. The skull sat on top, facing the tarp. Flies buzzed around it. A thin length of rope hung from the branch above, swinging slowly. I didn't stay long. I moved past the tarp and picked a direction. I didn't care about the map anymore. I just wanted out. I followed the slope of the land downhill, thinking I'd hit a road or another marked trail. As the forest grew darker, I saw less and heard more. Cracks in the distance, breathing sounds that weren't mine. Every step I took felt like something was closing in behind me. Then I saw the structure. It wasn't a cabin or a shack, more like a hunting blind, built from old plywood and branches, sitting low to the ground. One small, rectangular window looked out over the trees. I approached slowly, cautiously. There were boot prints around it, large ones, deep ones, more than one set. Inside it was dark, but I could see a sleeping bag, a pile of crushed beer cans, and something scribbled on the plywood wall in what looked like charcoal. Just marks. Excess. Dozens of them, overlapping. One section had tally marks grouped in 5s, carved deep into the wood. I backed away. It was nearly dark now. I turned my flashlight on. It flickered at first, then steadied. I moved as fast as I could, stepping over logs, pushing through brush. I've always liked hiking, not the fancy kind with tour guides or planned out routes that have signs and cafes and things like that. I'm talking about real hiking, the kind where you bring your own gear, map out your own route, and just walk through forests, hills, and mountains without depending on anyone. I liked the silence, the feeling of being alone in nature, the sound of my own footsteps on dry leaves or dirt trails. That was peace to me. I had done a lot of trails over the years, both in summer and fall. Never really had any major problems. A few minor sprains here and there, a twisted ankle once, and a time I got rained on while camping. But nothing serious. I think that made me too confident. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I could handle anything nature threw at me. It was late October when I decided to take a week off work and head out into the hills of northern Montana. I had read about this particular trail on an old hiking forum. It wasn't listed on many modern maps, just a few mentions here and there. They said it was a tough one. Not dangerous exactly, but long, wild, and isolated. Not many people took it anymore. That was exactly what I wanted. A week away from people, noise, work, and everything else. The weather forecast showed a cold week, but no snow or rain expected. Just dry, crisp fall days. Perfect for hiking. I packed everything I usually did: tent, thermal sleeping bag, plenty of food, 2 water filters, a satellite phone, my GPS, a backup battery pack, extra socks, gloves, a heavy jacket, and a .357 revolver. I always carried the revolver with me. Not because I was scared of people, but because mountain lions and bears didn't care who you were. It was mostly for peace of mind. I parked my car at a small pull-off near a service road, the last point cars could reach before it turned into thick woods. Took me about an hour to find the overgrown trailhead. It wasn't marked clearly, just a small break in the tree line, barely noticeable unless you knew it was there. The trail was narrow and covered in pine needles, but once I stepped onto it and walked a few hundred feet, I could tell it had been used before. Maybe not recently, but it was definitely a real trail. The first 2 days were perfect. Cold, quiet, peaceful. I made good progress. I camped by a frozen creek the first night, then by a ridge overlooking miles of pine forest the second. Each night I made a small fire, cooked dehydrated meals, and slept early. I didn't hear or see a single soul, not even animals beyond the occasional squirrel or distant bird call. I was loving every second of it. But on the third day, things started to feel off. I woke up before sunrise, like I always do while camping. It was colder than usual, and there was frost on the inside of my tent. My breath looked like smoke. I had to shake ice off my boots before I could even put them on. As I packed my things, I noticed a strange set of tracks near my tent. They weren't animal tracks. They were boot prints. Human. They weren't mine. They came from the woods and stopped about 10 feet from my tent. Then they turned and went back into the trees. That was it. No circling. No confusion, just a straight path in and back out. I stood there for a while, just staring at them. The prints were a little smaller than mine, maybe a size 9 or 10. The heel mark was deep, heavier step, maybe someone carrying a pack. I looked around, tried to listen. Nothing, just whined through trees and my own breathing. I wasn't scared yet, but I was on edge. This wasn't a trail where you randomly ran into other people. And if someone was hiking it, why would they walk up to my tent and then leave without making a sound? I moved faster that day, kept checking behind me. Every little snap of a twig made me turn my head. I felt like I was being watched, but I didn't see anything. I hiked for nearly 10 hours before stopping to set up camp. My legs were sore, my back hurt, but I wanted to get as far away from that spot as I could. That night, I didn't make a fire. I set up my tent behind a cluster of boulders, hoping it would be hidden from view. I ate inside the tent, zipped everything shut, and tried to stay quiet. I didn't sleep much. Every hour I woke up to listen. A couple of times I thought I heard something. Footsteps maybe, or a branch snapping. But it could have just been wind. I didn't check. I didn't want to. The next morning I checked the area. No footprints. Nothing disturbed. Maybe I had imagined the sounds. Maybe I was just tired. But by the 5th day, I was sure someone was following me. I stopped on the trail to rest around noon. I had a snack, drank some water, and was about to keep walking when I saw it. A small piece of blue cloth stuck to a branch just off the trail. It looked like part of a jacket. It wasn't there the day before. I walked over to it. It looked torn, like it had snagged on the branch. I looked around. No other signs. But now I knew I wasn't alone. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to turn back. That would take longer than finishing the trail. And besides, I didn't even know where the other person was or if they meant harm. They hadn't done anything. Maybe they were just another hiker, even if that seemed unlikely. That night, I set up my tent again near a large rock formation. I picked a spot that gave me a clear view downhill in case anyone approached. I stayed awake late, flashlight in one hand and my revolver in the other. Around midnight, I heard movement. It was soft at first, like something brushing against the trees. Then a twig snapped. Then another. Slow, steady, closer. I held my breath. I aimed my flashlight at the direction of the sound and turned it on. Nothing, just trees. Then I saw it. Something moved quickly behind a trunk about 30 feet away. I couldn't tell what it was. Too fast. But it was human-shaped.
Taller danme.
I didn't call out. I just held still, flashlight shining on the spot. I listened for more movement. I didn't hear anything after that. After 10 minutes of nothing, I slowly backed into my tent, zipped it shut, and didn't sleep. I left before sunrise. I was exhausted. I kept stumbling on the trail. My feet hurt. My knees ached. But I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. Midway through the 6th day, I found something that made my stomach drop. It was a campsite, a very old one. The fire pit was full of ash, damp and gray. There were broken tent poles, a rusted metal cup, and something worse, a torn sleeping bag, still zipped halfway, with what looked like dried brown stains on the inside. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. I found a crushed pair of glasses under a log, a cracked phone with a dead battery lying in the dirt. Whoever had camped there never packed up. I left that spot quickly. I didn't even rest. I just kept moving. By the 7th day, I could see the ridgeline that marked the final stretch of the trail. It would lead down into a valley where there was a ranger station, just a couple more miles. But my body felt like it was breaking. I had barely eaten the night before. I was sleep-deprived and tense. That morning, I noticed fresh prints again. They were just behind mine, not even a day old. Same size as before. Someone had followed my exact path. I didn't stop to think about it. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned. My knees buckled more than once. I nearly slipped down a rocky slope. But I didn't care. I needed to get to that station. When I finally saw the rooftop of the small ranger cabin through the trees, I nearly cried. I pushed through the last stretch of trail, heart pounding. The cabin was locked, but there was a radio box mounted outside. I opened it and used the emergency channel to call for help. While I waited, I sat with my back to the cabin, revolver in my lap, staring at the trail. No one came out. No one followed. When help arrived 2 hours later, they found me sitting in the same spot, shaking. I didn't tell them everything, just said I thought someone was following me and that I wasn't feeling right. They gave me water, helped me into their truck, and took me down to the main station. The ranger there asked me questions. I gave them vague answers. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I didn't want to be that guy. But I asked one thing before I left. I asked if anyone else had been reported missing on that trail. The ranger looked at me and said, "No one hikes that trail anymore. We don't even maintain it. Last report we had was a guy who went missing 8 years ago. Solo hiker. They never found him." I didn't say anything else. I never went hiking alone again. I always liked doing things on my own. Not because I didn't have friends or people to go with, but because I felt more in control when I was alone. There was something peaceful about being out in the woods by myself, without hearing anyone else's footsteps or breathing. Just mine. Just the quiet. Just the sound of wind going through leaves, or dry sticks cracking under my boots. I had planned this hike for almost 2 weeks. I studied the area using topographic maps, watched a few trail videos online, and picked a remote part of the northern mountains that most people didn't go to. It wasn't a national park or any place famous, just miles and miles of dense forest, old logging roads, and faded trails that had nearly disappeared over the years. There were no man-made shelters or ranger stations, just wilderness. I packed everything I needed in a 65-liter hiking pack. Tent, sleeping bag, cook set, food for 6 days, water filters, first aid kit, bear spray, extra socks, 2 knives, solar charger for my GPS, and a few other small things. I also brought a journal and a pen. I always did that when I went alone, just to write things down if anything strange happened. I started early in the morning, parked my car off an old gravel road that was already overgrown with weeds, and began the hike through thick forest. The first few hours were easy. The trail, though faint, was still there. I saw signs that someone had hiked it maybe a year ago, old boot prints, faded tape tied around branches. That gave me some comfort. The forest was deep and quiet. Tall pine trees, thick underbrush, and long stretches where sunlight barely reached the ground. It was cool even in the middle of the day. I didn't see or hear a single person. No airplanes, no cars, no dogs barking in the distance. Nothing. Just birds, wind, and the sound of my pack brushing against my back as I walked. I set up my camp around 5 in the evening on the first day, near a small creek. I filtered water, made some instant noodles, and sat near a rock while I ate. The air was so still it felt like the world had been paused. I didn't even hear insects buzzing, just the crackling of leaves when a squirrel ran by or when the wind passed through the dry trees. I wasn't scared. I was used to this. I liked the solitude. I always felt safer away from people than around them, but I still remember the feeling I got the first night. Around midnight, I was half asleep inside my tent when I heard something. It wasn't loud. It was soft, like someone brushing against a tree or slowly walking over dry leaves. I held my breath and waited. The sound came again. It was maybe 20 feet away. Then silence. I stayed awake for almost an hour, holding the knife I kept beside me when I camped. But the sound didn't come back. I told myself it was an animal, probably a deer. The next morning, I broke camp and hiked further in. The trail started fading. At some points, I had to use my compass and GPS just to keep going in the right direction. I didn't like using GPS much, but in this place, it helped me figure out how far I was from the old forest road and how deep I'd gone into the woods. That day was long. The terrain got tougher. Steeper slopes, thicker brush, and more fallen trees. My legs burned. I sweat through my shirt. At one point, I slipped down a muddy hill and cut my forearm on a sharp rock. It bled for a while, but I washed it and wrapped it up. By late afternoon, I came across what looked like an old fire ring, a small pile of stones, half buried in moss and dirt. It looked like no one had used it in years, but next to it I saw something that didn't fit. A torn corner of a plastic food wrapper, still bright, not faded, maybe a few months old. I looked around but didn't see any other signs of people. No tracks, no gear, no other trash, just that one piece. I pocketed it and kept going. That night, I made camp in a small clearing surrounded by trees. It was quiet again, too quiet. As I sat eating, I had a strange feeling, like someone was close, watching. I kept glancing toward the trees, expecting to see a deer or maybe even a bear, but there was nothing, just thick black woods all around me. I went to bed early and zipped myself tight inside the tent. The wind picked up a bit that night, and I could hear branches moving overhead. It wasn't peaceful anymore. The silence now felt heavy, unnatural. I thought about getting up and hiking back the next morning. Maybe I had gone far enough, but I didn't. I kept going. On the third day, the trail disappeared completely. I relied only on the GPS now, and it wasn't always accurate in the deep woods. Sometimes it told me I was standing in one spot when I had clearly walked 100 yards already. I began marking trees with a piece of orange ribbon so I wouldn't get turned around. Around noon that day, I found something I still don't know how to explain. It was a campsite, not an old one. The tent was still up, blue, dome-style, small enough for one person, but it was torn down the side, slashed, like someone had cut through it with a blade. Inside was a sleeping bag, unzipped, covered in dirt and leaves. There was a small fire pit nearby, cold and full of ashes. A metal cup was laying in the ashes. I stood there for 10 minutes, just staring. I called out. Nothing. I walked around the site carefully, looking for tracks. I saw faint boot prints leading deeper into the woods, but they were old. Days old at least. Maybe more. The place felt abandoned, but not in a normal way. It felt like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. I looked inside the tent again. The sleeping bag was still clean inside, like someone had only used it a few times. There was a pack too, empty. No food, no tools, just a few random things. A broken headlamp, a lighter, a soggy notebook that had bled ink all through the pages. That's when the fear started to really kick in. I didn't feel alone anymore, not in a comforting way, more like I had stepped into someone else's space, somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. I backed away slowly, keeping my ears open. I kept looking behind me every few steps. I hiked 2 more miles before making camp. I wanted to get far away from that tent. That night, the sounds came back. Footsteps. Not heavy, not fast, just slow, careful. I stayed frozen in my tent, holding my knife again. This time, the sounds circled my tent. Once, then twice. I thought about unzipping it and yelling, but I was too scared. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. The steps stopped after a while, and then it was silent again. The 4th day was hard. I barely slept. My legs were shaking from exhaustion. I kept thinking about the torn tent and the footsteps. I considered turning back, but I wasn't sure I could find my way anymore. My GPS glitched more often now. It would freeze, then suddenly place me a mile from where I thought I was. The forest all looked the same. The trees, the rocks, even the sun didn't help because of how thick the canopy was. Around the middle of the day, I saw another sign, a sock, a single, dirty, blue sock hanging from a tree branch, just hanging there, like someone had placed it on purpose. There was no trail, no path, just that one sock in the middle of nowhere. I didn't touch it. I stared at it for a long time, then walked in the opposite direction. I made camp early that evening. I was too tired to go on. I chose a spot near a rocky ledge where at least one side of me was protected. I didn't even eat much. I just sat there, too tired to think clearly. That night, the sounds were worse. I didn't just hear footsteps. I heard something brushing against my tent. Light touches, like someone dragging fingers along the fabric. I held my breath. I didn't move. I thought about running, but where would I go? The woods were dark. I didn't know the direction anymore. The touching stopped. But then I heard something else. Breathing, just outside. Not loud, just slow, steady breathing. My body was frozen. I waited for what felt like forever. Then it stopped. No footsteps, no running, just silence. I stayed awake till sunrise. The 5th morning, I made a decision. I would backtrack. I didn't care how far I had gone. I had enough battery left in the solar charger for 1 full day of GPS. I would use it to retrace my steps. I packed up fast, didn't even eat breakfast. I just wanted out. I hiked fast, too fast. I twisted my ankle once and had to sit down. I kept going anyway. Around mid-afternoon, I reached the spot where I had seen the sock. It was gone. That's when I knew someone else was out there. Maybe they had been following me. Maybe they had been there long before I ever came. Watching, I felt exposed, hunted. I kept going. My hands shook when I filtered water from the creek. I didn't stop to rest. By the 6th day, my legs were giving out. I ran out of food. I rationed the last protein bar and ate it that morning. My water filters were dirty, clogged from all the creek water. I kept drinking. I've always liked being alone in the woods. Maybe it's because I grew up around nature, or maybe it's just because I feel more in control when it's just me and the trail. I don't need to depend on anyone. I don't have to talk. I just have to walk, listen, and keep moving forward. That's what drew me to hiking, especially solo hiking. The silence, the freedom, the simple rhythm of my boots on dirt. I didn't hike to relax like some people do. I did it to feel something real. It was early October when I decided to take a week off work and head out to a remote area in northern Idaho. I'd been reading about a trail system deep in the Clearwater National Forest, dense pine woods, long rivers, tough elevation changes. A friend once mentioned a loop trail there that took about 4 to 5 days to complete if you went slow. I planned to finish it in 3. I packed my gear the night before I left. I had a lightweight tent, a sleeping bag, a bare canister full of food, a water filter, a map I printed out from a hiking forum, a compass, 2 knives, and a small first aid kit. I double-checked my battery packs, made sure my phone was on airplane mode to save charge, and marked the GPS coordinates of the trailhead just in case I got turned around. I didn't expect to have service out there anyway. I also had an old analog watch I trusted more than anything digital. It's been with me for years. I don't use trackers or GPS watches. Just a map, a compass, and my gut. I drove to the trailhead early in the morning and parked my truck at a small pull-off that barely had room for 3 vehicles. Only one other car was there, dusty and coated in pine needles. It looked like it had been sitting for a few days. I figured someone was already on the trail. That was fine. I wasn't looking to make friends. The trail started off easy, wide paths, pine needles underfoot, and patches of sunlight breaking through the trees. The air was cool but dry, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I made good time the first day, hiked about 15 miles before setting up camp by a small creek. I boiled water for dinner, stretched my legs, and listened to the trees creaking as the wind picked up slightly before dark. I barely slept that night, but I never really do on the first night. My body always needs time to settle into the woods again. I heard coyotes in the distance, but nothing came near. Day 2 was harder. The trail narrowed, the elevation climbed, and I started moving slower. My thighs burned, and my shoulders were getting sore from the pack weight. Still, I pushed ahead. I didn't take long breaks, just a few minutes here and there to drink water and chew on some jerky. I passed a couple of trail markers, though they were barely visible. Just old faded wooden stakes, some of them broken or missing entirely. I followed the route I mapped out, but the farther I went, the more the trail disappeared beneath layers of fallen leaves and overgrown brush. Around midday, I noticed something odd. There were no fresh footprints, no sign of hikers, no scuffed earth, no broken branches. Usually, even in remote areas, you can tell when someone's come through recently. But this trail looked like it hadn't been walked in months. That was strange, considering the other car back at the trailhead. I stopped, took out my map, and checked my location using the compass. I was still on track, or at least I thought I was. The trail looped east before climbing north into the deeper parts of the forest. I kept going, though I had this growing feeling that something was off. I kept seeing small signs of movement in the distance, quick flashes of something between the trees, but every time I looked, there was nothing. It wasn't animals. It felt too deliberate, too fast. Still, I told myself I was just tired. That happens on the second day, especially when the adrenaline starts wearing off and the silence of the woods sinks in too deep. By the end of the second day, I was completely drained. I didn't even eat dinner. I pitched my tent in a small hollow, surrounded by tall trees. The sky above was covered in thick clouds by then, and the air had gotten colder. I barely slept again. I kept hearing distant snapping branches. Not close, but not far either. I unzipped my tent at one point and scanned the dark woods with my flashlight. Nothing, just trees and shadows. Day 3 was when everything started to fall apart. I woke up early, packed up quickly, and tried to get back on the trail. But when I started walking, I realized something was wrong. The terrain didn't match the map anymore. I was supposed to follow a ridge line north for several miles, but the path I was on led down into a ravine I didn't recognize. I checked the compass again. North was behind me. That made no sense. I hadn't turned around. I looked for the last trail marker I remembered passing, but I couldn't find it. The forest around me all looked the same. I kept walking anyway. I figured I could circle back and rejoin the main trail. I thought I'd recognize some kind of landmark eventually, a stream, a bend, anything. But the longer I walked, the more lost I felt. I wasn't following a trail anymore. I was just walking through trees. The underbrush got thicker, and my legs were getting torn up from thorns and dry branches. My boots were soaked from a marshy patch I stumbled into without realizing it. By late afternoon, I started to panic. I hadn't eaten all day. I sat down under a tree, opened a protein bar, and chewed slowly while staring at my map. I tried to trace my steps, but nothing matched. I didn't know where I was anymore. It was like I had stepped off the edge of the world without noticing. That night, I set up camp near a small cluster of boulders. I was too exhausted to keep moving. I built a small fire using dry bark and pine twigs, trying to calm myself down. The warmth helped, but the fire made me feel exposed too. I kept looking over my shoulder every few minutes. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around midnight, I heard movement. Not distant this time, closer, leaves crunching, slow and deliberate. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my knife in one hand, the flashlight in the other. I clicked it on and pointed it out through the tent screen. I didn't see anything, but the noise didn't stop. It circled the tent slowly, then silence. Not even the wind, just a heavy stillness that pressed against my ears. I didn't sleep at all. I waited until daylight and packed up the moment I could see. I didn't even eat. I just started walking. I didn't care about direction anymore. I just wanted out. I figured if I kept going west, I'd eventually hit a road or a ranger station. Anything. But by noon, I realized I was walking in circles. I came across my own boot prints. I recognized a tree I had marked earlier with a small notch in the bark. I cursed myself, kicked the dirt, and sat down on a fallen log. My legs were shaking from exhaustion, and my hands were starting to feel numb. That evening, I found something that made my heart drop. A campsite, not mine, someone else's. Old, broken down, abandoned. The tent was collapsed, covered in moss and dirt. A torn sleeping bag was half buried nearby. An empty metal canteen lay on its side. I searched around it, looking for any sign of a trail or note or gear that could help me, but it looked like it had been there for years. No names, no ID, no food, just silence. I moved on, shaken. The next 2 days were a blur. I rationed what little food I had left and drank from streams after filtering the water. I stopped caring about pace. I was completely lost. Every night I heard noises in the dark. Branches breaking, slow footsteps. Sometimes I swore I saw movement in the trees just as the sun went down. But I never saw a person, just the sound of someone or something always staying just far enough away. By day 6, I couldn't take it anymore. I dropped my pack and climbed a small ridge to try and get a better view. I stood at the top and looked out over miles of trees. No towers, no smoke, no movement, just endless forest. I screamed. No one answered. I punched a tree until my knuckles bled. It didn't help. I stayed up there for a long time. That's when I finally saw something. A thin line in the distance, like a cut through the trees. A road maybe, or a power line. I didn't care. I marked the direction with my compass and started walking toward it, even though it was probably 10 miles away, maybe more. It took all of the next day and most of the day after to reach it. It wasn't a road. It was an old firebreak, just a cleared path between tree lines. But I followed it anyway. Eventually, it led me to a dirt road. And not long after, I saw a sign nailed to a tree. It was faded and rusted, but it had a Forest Service number on it. I collapsed in the middle of that road and just lay there for half an hour, breathing heavy, eyes burning. A few hours later, a hunter in a pickup truck found me. He said I was 30 miles from the trailhead I started at, 30 miles east. I had gone completely off course. He gave me food and water and drove me back to my truck. I didn't say much. I didn't explain. He didn't ask. When I finally reached my truck, the other car was still there, unchanged, covered in weeks' worth of dirt and pine needles.